Good morning. Well, is everybody warm enough today? It was a little bit chilly this morning, but we're glad to be here today. We're going through a series, and we're looking at the patterns as we begin this new year, 2024. We're looking at the patterns that Jesus had in his life, and what can we learn about how he lived that we might incorporate in the way we live every day. And we started out talking about solitude. We talked about how being quiet is important in your life, to have some time you do that. We looked at some Bible about that, and we looked at the story of Elijah and that. And then we looked at the Sabbath last Sunday. We looked at what it meant to take a day off and what that was about, why God made that a commandment. And then today we're going to look at this idea of simplicity and this idea of living within your means and living a simple life. You know, churches have to live within their means too, and so a lot of you weren't able to come to the business meeting this last Wednesday, and something was shared that I thought everybody might not know, and so I'll let you know that because we were able to harvest some of our trees on some of our land, and we had some savings. Anyway, we have paid off, the church has paid off all debt that we have. Thank the Lord. And that's a blessing from God, and I'm so thankful for that. You know, not all churches are like this. I heard that there was this Baptist pastor, and he had one in the congregation that came and said, you know, my dog was passed away, and I was wondering if you'd come to my house and have a funeral for my dog. And the pastor seemed kind of annoyed by that, and he said, you know, I can't do a funeral for a dog. And the man said, that's too bad. I was thinking about making a $5,000 donation to your church. And the pastor smiled and said, why didn't you tell me your dog was a Baptist? That's a dad joke. Preacher dad joke. So we're talking about simplicity, okay, and how you live your life. And there's this story and this interaction that Jesus had in the Gospel of Luke that I think is very appropriate for us today. And so I want to look at this in Luke chapter 12. Beginning in verse 13, it begins, he was teaching some people, and somebody in the crowd came to Jesus and said, Teacher, tell my brother to divide the inheritance with me. Now, most of the time, you wouldn't think that it would be a religious leader you'd go to because this is kind of a legal matter. But in their culture, the religious and the legal were kind of combined. And so it was likely that this might happen. A lot of times in their culture, wealth was passed on from one person to another, probably more often than it was made because of the way the culture was organized. It is probably what has happened is that this is the younger brother coming to tell Jesus that his older brother, who has the authority, has not divided the inheritance. And so he's asking Jesus to be like a referee. And, you know, this still goes on today. You know, people die and their people argue over furniture and dishes and silverware and house and lands. I have done funerals before where people have stormed out of the funeral because they were upset at what they weren't getting or something like this. And this older brother was, I don't know why he didn't share the inheritance. It may be that he thought the younger brother, like the story of the prodigal son, was going to waste the money. And so selling some property would reduce the whole wealth of the family. And so he was had this problem. But, you know, this person could have said to Jesus, you know, I've got this problem with my brother. Can you come and work this out with us? But he doesn't. He tells Jesus what to do. Tell my brother to do this and this. And Jesus replied, man, who appointed me a judge or an arbiter between you? He's pretty short with the guy. You know, there was this book that was written a long time ago called In His Steps. And in this book, it was written by Charles Sheldon. There's this idea of WWJD. Have you ever heard of that? it means what would Jesus do? And so we're supposed to, in our behaviors, we're supposed to think, now what would Jesus do? The issue here, though, is a lot of times in the Bible, Jesus is really short with stupid people. I mean, he is. I mean, he was perfect. Jesus is perfect. But this is really all what he says to this guy. Man, who made me judge, an arbiter? And there's a little play on the words here. In the Greek, an arbiter was meristasy, and a reconciler was mesostasy. And so Jesus was a reconciler, not an arbiter. And that can be seen in his whole ministry. But he said this to the guy, and I guess the guy kind of, if you read it carefully, probably the guy moved on. And then he turns to the disciples, and he says, watch out. Be on your guard against all kind of greed. Because greed is a bad thing. The Bible calls it covet. The sin command about what? Not covet. You're not supposed to be greedy. And this guy evidently was wanting. And then Jesus says, life does not consist in abundance of possessions. Even though that's exactly what culture today teaches. I guess it always has taught that it's about getting. It's all about how much you get. And we live in a culture like that. And then Jesus just doesn't stop there. Now he turns to everybody that was there that day, and he tells a story. He tells a parable. And he told them this parable going on. Now, a parable is a short story. Its meaning is in sufficient doubt that it teases your mind into active thought. So when you hear parable, most of the time there was something in it that didn't really fit. And people would say, what? And it would get you to thinking. And so he tells a parable. He said, the ground of a certain rich man yielded an abundant harvest. And so there was a farmer, and he had a big harvest. It produced a good crop. And what caused the crop? God. Clearly, I mean, when you water something and you plant it and you weed it, yeah, you do all these things, but it's really God that makes it grow. You know, we do those things, but we really don't understand how that works, I think, how that actually grows. God causes the growth, but he doesn't recognize this. Paul talks in his letters about how we plant and water, and God causes the growth, same way with human beings. You know, we invest in these kids, and you teach them, and you hope, and you pray that if you give them the right example, that they're going to grow in their faith. But that's not the way this guy saw it. He saw it as all about him, and he said, the ground of rich man yielded an abundant harvest, and then it goes on. He thought to himself, what shall I do? I have no place to store my crops. And then he said, this is what I'll do. I'll tear down my barns, and I'll build bigger ones. And there I will store my surplus grain, and I'll say to myself, you have plenty of grain laid up for many years. Take it, eat, life easy, drink, and be merry. And if you read this part careful, you find that there are 5 my's and 6 I's. Because he's all about himself. He says, my crops, my granaries, my wheat, my good things, my soul. He doesn't consult with other people. It's all about him. And then he says, I's, his 6 I's. What shall I do? I have no place to store my crops. This is what I'll do. I will tear down. I will store my surplus. I'll say to myself. So it's all about I, my. He talks to himself, plans for himself, and completely lives for himself. This is the story. And it's not a good one. This is the image that a lot of us kind of live by sometimes. You know, the Bible talks about this idea of of always doing things for yourself in many places. In the Old Testament, Jeremiah 17:11 says this, like a partridge that hatches eggs it did not lay, are those who gain riches by unjust means. When their lives are half gone, their riches will desert them, and in the end, they will prove to be fools. And that's what this guy is told by God. And God said to him, even though you got this all planned out, God said to him, you fool, this very night your life will be demanded from you. And then who will get what you have prepared for yourself? And so, this guy had been talking to himself. You ever talk to yourself? I do. He plans for himself, and he completely lives for himself, and he thinks, I got bumper crop, I got bulging barns. And so he says, even though I got a perfectly good barn, I'm going to tear it down and build a brand new one. And, if you read the rest of these accounts of Jesus' life, not long afterwards, there's a story of Lazarus, who was the beggar who sat by the rich man's gate. He couldn't give something to Lazarus. There was a story of the woman that went to give back, and all she had was 2 leptas, 2 pennies to give, but she gave. He could have helped her. He could have helped a lot of people, but all his solution is for all the stuff he's got is to get more stuff. Now, hoarding the grain will give him security, and he thinks of all of it as what he has earned. Proverbs 1:7 says, the fear of the Lord is the beginning of knowledge, but fools despise wisdom and instruction. Jesus said at another point in this, in 9:25, Jesus says, what good is it for someone to gain the whole world and yet lose and forfeit their very self? And this is what this guy is doing. He keeps getting. It's all about getting. And thinking that down the road, that's going to make him really happy. I don't know if we think it through a lot. The truth is, having a lot can cause a lot of worries. I never worry about barnacles getting on my big fishing boat that I own, because I don't got one. I never worry about having to buy brakes and rotors on my luxury German car that can go 200 miles an hour, and so it needs really expensive brakes. I don't have to worry about that because I don't have one. Oh, no, you don't. I don't have to worry about continually paying for several storage sheds to save stuff that I never use or see because I don't have that. Now, don't look in my garage. I got a lot of stuff in my garage that I need to get rid of. Yeah. We have this thing that we want more and more and more. Mark Twain said once, he said, what's the chief end of man? And this is a joke. He said, to get rich. In what way? Dishonestly if he can, honestly if he must. This man, he had plenty to live on, but nothing to live for. What do you have to live for? Jesus tells this story. He says, this is how it'll be with whoever stores up things for themselves, but is not rich towards God. There's another translation of this, a Message translation. It's a paraphrase. I love the way it says, here's what it says, this same verse. It translates it this way. That's what happens when you fill your barn with self and not with God. What is your barn filled with? Abundance of things creates an abundance of worries. The more you have, you think you have to have more. It's not about that. It's about other things that are more important. You can have plenty to live on, but nothing to live for. Paul, he had a lot and he had a little, depending on what part of his life it was. He says, I know what is to be a need, for I know what it is to have a lot. I've learned the secret of being content and in every situation. Paul said, I've learned the secret of being content, whether well-fed or hungry, whether living in plenty or in want. So do you have that in your life? Do you know that it's not all about getting more and more and more? It's not. And the Bible teaches this clearly, that you should live a simple life. Now, I don't think that means that you all need to get a tiny house. I don't think I get claustrophobic in a tiny house. But it does mean we need to think about what we have and how we're giving to others instead of just getting more and more and more, like this guy in the story Jesus tells. So how do you change? Just a few direct ideas that can change. First of all, be grateful for what you have. Appreciate what God has already given you. You might think, well, I got this house because I work for it, Well, who gave you the energy and the brains and the ability to work so you got that house? Everything we have is a gift from God. And when you think about that and you realize, wow, this is a blessing to me. Ecclesiastes 5:19 says this, moreover, when God gives someone wealth and possessions, and by the way, compared to a lot of people in the world, if you have a refrigerator, you are wealthy. If you have, the basics, you are wealthy compared to most people in the world. But if God gives someone wealth and possessions and the ability to enjoy them, you got to be able to enjoy them. Accept what he's given you and be happy in what he's given you. This is a gift of God. Are you happy with what God has given you? Now I'm going to show just a quick little video and get back to the text here. But there's this guy that you may have seen him on the news. He worked for Burger King for 27 years. And after working there 27 years, the company wanted to reward him, and they gave him a little bag with some candy in it. Okay? And it didn't seem fair, and so his daughter heard about it, and his daughter put a GoFundMe account. Anyway, this video will show you what happens and how I think that you can be a blessing to others when God blesses you. So let's see this for a second.
Well, a very special fast food worker is now saying the words, "Welcome to my house," for the first time in his life.
I love this, okay? Kevin Ford went viral about a year and a half ago after showing off the gift he was given by his employer for 27 years of service without missing a single day. Wow. But now he's got something a whole lot better. Here's ABC's Danny New.
I worked here for 27 years. I've never missed not one day of work, never.
Back in 2022, Nevada Burger King employee Kevin Ford was not trying to mock his anniversary gift from the company.
You weren't that mad about it.
No, I wasn't upset at all. I was grateful. And I also got a bag of Reese's.
But after Kevin posted the video of his reward for nearly 30 years of perfect attendance, which was headlined by candy, pens, and a cup, the internet did not echo his gratitude. They felt Kevin deserved more for his years of service. One commenter writing, quote, yes, a cheap goodie bag like the ones from the end of school during kindergarten.
It was shocking, for sure.
So when Kevin's daughter, Serena, saw the video blowing up on social media, she was like, yeah, my dad always deserves more. She started a GoFundMe page just to raise $200 for Kevin to come visit his grandchildren in Texas.
And what happened?
We got a lot more than $200.
Turned out the whole world really wanted Kevin to get a proper anniversary gift. And a year and a half later, that page has now raised more than $450,000.
Hey, you live here in Pittsburgh?
No, actually, I'm here.
Bye-bye.
Including a $5,000 donation from comedian David Spade.
It's an absolute beautiful miracle of what has happened. I wanted to show you something you made possible.
Well, thanks to those donations, this past week, Kevin got to move into a new home.
Already, I know it's not a mansion, but it's mine.
Of course, near his Burger King.
When they tell you there's no hope for humanity in the world and all this, don't believe them. Hold me up as an example, because people are beautiful.
When I told Kevin I now felt bad for any time that I've called out sick, he said, quote, "Don't be like me. Take those days off. Spend time with your family." So, good news.
You can go on to the
have
next one now.
Gotten Kevin.
Thank you. Okay. So this idea that it's all about us. You know, this guy worked 27 years without missing a day, didn't get a whole lot, but he wasn't upset about it. He wasn't complaining. He wasn't arguing about it. And by the way, he continues to work now. Still hadn't missed a day, you know. And this idea of God blesses you, and I've seen other videos where he talks about, you know, now when I go into a restaurant or something and I see people that have a large family, they don't look like they have a lot, I buy them the meal. You know, he pays it forward, and I think that's really important, that you don't just gather. It's not all about us. There's this parable of the Mexican fisherman you may have heard. There was an American investment banker. He was at a small Mexican town, and there was a guy there with his boat, and he had just finished fishing for the day, and he caught a yellowfin tuna. And the American complimented the Mexican guy on the quality of the fish, and he asked him how long it took him to catch it. And the guy said, only a little while. And then the American said, well, why didn't you stay out longer and catch more fish? He said, well, I got enough to feed my family, take care of our needs. He said, well, what do you do the rest of your time? And he said, I sleep late, fish a little, play with my children, take siesta with my wife, Maria, stroll in the village in the evening where I play guitar with my amigos. I have a full and busy life. And the American scoffed, you know, I'm a Harvard MBA. I could help you. You could spend more time fishing. With the proceeds, buy a bigger boat. With the proceeds from the bigger boat, you could buy several boats, you know, and then eventually you could buy a fleet of boats. And instead of selling your catch, you could take the middleman out and directly to the processor, and you open your own cannery. And then you could control the product, the processing, and the distribution. And then you would need to leave this small coastal village, move to Mexico City, then to LA, and eventually New York, where you run your expanding enterprise. And the Mexican fisherman said, well, how long would that take? Oh, about 20, 25 years. And the guy said, what do I do then? And he said, well, that's the best part. Then, when the time is right, you could announce an IPO, a buyout, sell your company, become very rich, and have millions of dollars. And he said, well, then what I could do? And the American said, well, then you could retire, move to a small coastal village where you would sleep late, fish a little bit, play with your kids, take siestas, and play the guitar with your amigos. You know, sometimes it's nothing wrong with planning the future. I mean, God's created squirrels, hide nuts, and you got a plan for the future, nothing wrong with that. But when you focus all on yourself, that's the opposite of what we're supposed to be doing. God gives us a blessing, and we should be a blessing. Second, don't compare yourself to others. You know, we have a tendency to compare jobs, to compare income, compare cars, compare homes. You know, it's dumb to compare. You don't need to do that. I heard about this couple that they were going on this tour of different homes, and they walk out of this home, and the wife said, did you see their furniture? It goes all the way back to Louis XIV. And her husband says, yep, and ours goes back to Haynes on the 15th. Don't compare yourself. 2 Corinthians 10:12, Paul says, we do not dare to classify or compare ourselves with some who commend themselves. When they measure themselves by themselves and compare themselves with themselves, they're not wise. You know, learn to admire without having to acquire. Learn to see things and you say, you know, I really like that, but don't think, oh, I got to get something better than that. Say, you know, I appreciate that. I'm glad you got it. Just enjoy it. Be grateful for what you have. Don't be envious of others. And 3, be generous with what you have. You know, be able to bless others. Be willing to, next time you loan something to somebody, think about, well, maybe I should just give it to them. Because the truth is, none of us are getting out of here alive if Jesus doesn't come back first. Now, what are you going to do with all the extra stuff? You know, we get more, build more, get more, you know, storage sheds, several houses, I don't know. People have lots of stuff. Be generous with what you have. 1 Timothy says, command those who are rich in this present world not to be arrogant nor put their hope in wealth, which is so uncertain, but put their hope in God, who richly provides us with everything for our enjoyment. Command them to do good, to be rich in good deeds, to be generous and willing to share. Sell your possessions and give to the poor. Jesus says, provide purses for yourselves that will not wear out, a treasure that will never fail, where no thief comes in and no moth destroys. For life is more than food, and the body is more than clothes. You know, I don't know how to be clear about all this. We need to be those kinds of people. We need to be generous. We need to be saying, okay, it's not all about my retirement package, okay? It's not all about me getting more. It's about me investing what God has given me in other people, because that's the only thing that lasts. That's the only thing that lasts. And as you get older, you see it a little clearer. And what Jesus says is true.